Welcome. Hope you're staying warm. We're going to read a couple chapters today, or actually parts of a couple chapters. So, To Kill a Mockingbird. So the first thing we need to do is find the book. I don't know where I put it. Let's see, here it is, To Kill a Mockingbird novel. So let's just click on that. And we're going to be in chapter 8 and 9. So, oh my goodness. I have to go back. Gosh darn it. I think it's going to be, let's see if I can find this. Sorry guys, trying to. Okay, here we go. So page 70 on yours, or you can just look on this screen. We're on page 70. This is chapter 8. I'm going to pick it up on this page, page 70, which is, we're skipping a little bit. So what has happened at this point is that Maycomb, Scout and Jim and Atticus's hometown has been hit with a freeze. Okay, and there's a little bit of snow that falls, and this just blows everybody away. They're not able to fully comprehend this. They're just blown away by this much cold, and the kids have never seen snow in their lives. So they go out and they decide to build a snowman, and they have no idea how to do it. And so what they end up with is a snow person that kind of resembles a woman, kind of resembles a man, and they're not trying to be gross or anything. It's just a kind of a comical, and they call it a morphodite is the name of it. So, and so the kids have fun building the snowman. School gets canceled. They have to build fires inside the house, which they normally don't have to do. So that's their little day. And so we're going to pick it up here after Scout has gone to sleep, where it says minutes later. Minutes later, it seemed, I was awakened by someone shaking me. Atticus's overcoat was spread across me. Is it morning already? Baby, get up. Atticus was holding out my bathrobe and coat. Put your robe on first, he said. Jim was standing beside Atticus, groggy and tousled. He was holding his overcoat closed at his neck, and his other hand was jammed into his pocket. He looked strangely overweight. Hurry, hun, said Atticus. Here's your shoes and socks. Stupidly, I put them on. Is it morning? No, it's a little after 1. Now hurry now. That something was wrong finally got through to me. What's the matter? But by then he did not have to tell me. Just as the birds know where to go when it rains, I knew that there was trouble on our street. Soft, taffeta-like sounds and muffled scurrying sounds filled me with hopeless dread. Whose is it? It's Miss Maudie's, hun, said Atticus gently. At the front door, we saw fire spewing from Miss Maudie's dining room windows. As if to confirm what we saw, the town fire siren wailed up to a scale to a treble pitch and remained there, screaming. It's gone, ain't it? Moaned Jim. I expect so, said Atticus. Now listen, both of you. Go down and stand in front of the Radley place. Keep out of the way, do you hear? Do you see which way the wind's blowing? Oh, said Jim. Atticus, reckon we ought to start moving our furniture out? Not yet, son. Do as I tell you now. You run now. Take care of Scout, you hear? Don't let her out of your sight. With a push, Atticus started us toward the Radley front gate. Well, let's pause there. So there's a huge fire that happened inside Miss Maudie's house. It's burning crazily. And this is a tiny town, so there's only one fire truck. So the town's, this neighborhood's in a lot of danger because of the fire. It could easily spread to the other homes. And that's why Jim's like, well, you think we should take our furniture out? And that's why the kids were evacuated from the home, just in case it catches, okay? So Atticus is going to go over and try to help with the fire. With a push, Atticus started us toward the Radley front gate. We stood watching the street fill with men and cars while fire silently devoured Miss Maudie's house. Why don't they hurry? Why don't they hurry? Muttered Jim. We saw why. The old fire truck was killed by the cold, was being pushed from town by a crowd of men. When the men attached its hose to the hydrant, the hose burst and water shot up, tinkling down on the pavement. "Oh, Lord, Jim." Jim put his arm around me. "Hush, Scout," he said. "It ain't time to worry yet. I'll let you know when." The men of Maycomb, in all degrees of dress and undress, took furniture from Miss Maudie's house to the yard across the street. I saw Atticus carrying Miss Maudie's heavy oak rocking chair and thought it sensible of him to save what she valued most. Sometimes we heard shouts, and then Mr. Avery's face appeared in an upstairs window. He pushed a mattress out the window into the street and threw down the furniture until the men shouted, "Come down from there, Dick. The stairs are going. Get out of there, Mr. Avery." Mr. Avery began to climb through the window. "Scout, he's stuck," breathed Jim. "Oh, God." Mr. Avery was wedged tightly, and I buried my head under Jim's arm and didn't look again until Jim cried, "He's got loose, Scout. He's all right." I looked up to see Mr. Avery cross the upstairs porch. He swung his legs over the railing and was sliding down a pillar when he slipped. He fell, yelled, and hit Miss Maudie's shrubbery. Suddenly I noticed that the men were backing away from Miss Maudie's house, moving down the street toward us. They were no longer carrying furniture. The fire was well into the second floor and had eaten its way to the roof. Window frames were black against the vivid orange center. "Jim, looks like a pumpkin." "Scout, look." Smoke was rolling off our house and Miss Rachel's house like a fog off a riverbank, and men were pulling hoses toward them. Behind us, the fire truck from Abbotsville screamed around the curve and stopped in front of our house. "That book," I said. "What?" said Jim. "That book, that Tom Swift book. It ain't mine, it's Dill's." "Don't worry, Scout. It ain't time to worry yet," said Jim. He pointed. "Look yonder." In a group of neighbors, Atticus was standing with his hands in his overcoat pockets. He might have been watching a football game. Miss Maudie was beside him. "See there, he don't look worried yet," said Jim. "Well, why ain't he on top of one of the houses?" "He's too old. He'd break his neck." "You think we ought to make him get our stuff out?" "Let's not pester him. He'll know when it's time," said Jim. The Abbotsville fire truck began pumping water onto our house. A man on the roof pointed to places that needed it most. I watched our absolute morphodite, that's their snow person, go black and crumble. Miss Maudie's sun hat settled on top of the heap, and I could see her hedge clippers. In the heat between our house and Miss Rachel's and Miss Maudie's, the men had long ago shed coats and bathrobes. They worked in pajama tops and nightshirts and stuffed into their pants, but I became aware that I was slowly freezing where I stood. Jim kept me warm, but his arm was not enough. I pulled free of it and clutched my shoulders, and by dancing a little, I could feel my feet. Another fire truck appeared and stopped in front of Miss Stephanie Crawford's. There was no hydrant for another hose, and the men tried to soak her house with hand extinguishers. Miss Maudie's tin roof quelled the flames and the roaring. The house collapsed. Fire gushed everywhere, flowed by a flurry of blankets from men on top of the adjacent houses, beating out the sparks and burning chunks of wood. It was dawn before the men began to leave, first one by one and then in groups. They pushed the Maycomb fire truck back to town. The Abbotsville truck departed. The third one remained, and we found out the next day that it had come from Clark's Ferry, 60 miles away. Jim and I slid across the street. Miss Maudie was standing in the smoking black hole in her yard, and Atticus shook his head to tell us she did not want to talk. He led us home, holding on to our shoulders to cross the icy street. He said Miss Maudie would stay with Miss Stephanie for the time being. "Anybody want some hot chocolate?" he asked. I shuddered when Atticus started a fire in the kitchen stove. As we drank our cocoa, I noticed Atticus looking at me, first with curiosity and then with sternness. "I thought I told you and Jim to stay put," he said. "Why, we did. We stayed." "Then whose blanket is that?" "Blanket?" "Yes, ma'am, that blanket. It isn't ours." I looked down and found myself clutching a brown woolen blanket. I was wearing across my shoulders, squaw fashion. "Atticus, I don't know, sir. I turned to Jim for an answer, but Jim was even more bewildered than I. He said he didn't know how it got there. "We did exactly as Atticus told us. We stood down by the Radley gate, away from everybody. We didn't move an inch." Jim stopped. Mr. Nathan was at the fire, he babbled. I saw him. He was tugging at that mattress. Atticus, I swear. That's all right, son, Atticus grinned slowly. Looks like all of Maycomb was out tonight one way or another. Jim, there's some wrapping paper in the pantry, I think. Go get it, Will. Atticus, no, sir. Jim seemed to have lost his mind, and he began pouring out our secrets right and left in total disregard for my safety, if not for his own, omitting nothing, knothole, pants, and all. And then Mr. Nathan put cement in that tree. And Atticus, he did it to stop us from finding stuff. And he's crazy, I reckon, but like I say, Atticus, I swear to God he ain't ever harmed us. He ain't ever hurt us. He could have cut my throat from ear to ear that night, but he tried to mend my pants instead. He ain't ever hurt us, Atticus. Atticus said, Whoa, son, so gently that I was greatly heartened. It was obvious that he had not followed a word Jim had said, for all Atticus said was, You're right. We better keep this and the blanket to ourselves. Someday, maybe, Scout can thank him for covering her up. Thank who? I asked. Boo Radley. You were so busy looking at that fire, you didn't even know it when he put the blanket around you. My stomach turned to water, and I nearly threw up when Jim held out the blanket and crept up toward me. He sneaked out of the house and turned around and sneaked up and went like this. Atticus said dryly, Don't let this inspire you to further glory, Jeremy. Jim scowled. I ain't going to do anything to him, but I watched the spark of fresh adventure leave his eyes. Just think, Scout, he said, if you just would have turned around, you could have seen him. Calpurnia woke us at noon. Atticus had said we need not go to school that day. We'd learn nothing after no sleep. Calpurnia said for us to try and clean up the front yard. Miss Maudie's sun hat was suspended in a layer of ice like flying amber, and we had to dig under the dirt for her hedge clippers. We found her in the backyard, gazing at her frozen, charred flowers. We're bringing back your things, Miss Maudie, said Jim. We're awful sorry. Miss Maudie looked around, and the shadow of an old grin crossed her face. Always wanted a smaller house, Jim Finch. Gives me more yard. Just think, I'll have more room for my azaleas now. You ain't grieving, Miss Maudie? I asked, surprised. Atticus said her house was nearly all she had. Grieving, child. Why, I hated that old cow barn. I thought of setting fire to it 100 times myself, except they'd lock me out. But don't you worry about me, Jean Louise Finch. There are ways of doing things you don't know about. Well, I'll build me a little house, and I'll take in a couple of renters. And gracious, I'll have the finest yard in Alabama. Those belling grass will look plain puny when I get started. Jim and I looked at each other. How'd it catch, Miss Maudie? He asked. I don't know, Jim. Probably the flue in the kitchen. I kept a fire in there last night for my potted plants. Heard you had some unexpected company last night, Miss Jean Louise. How'd you know? Atticus told us on the way to town this morning. Tell you the truth, I'd like to have been with you, and I'd have the sense to turn around, too. Miss Maudie puzzled me. With most of her possessions gone and her beloved yard in shambles, she still took a lively and cordial interest in Jim and I's affairs. She must have seen my perplexity. She said, the only thing that worried me about last night was all the danger and commotion it caused. This whole neighborhood could have gone up. Mr. Avery will be in bed for a week. He's right stove up. He's too old to do things like that, and I told him so. As soon as I get my hands clean, and Miss Stephanie Crawford's not looking, I'll make him a laying cake. That Miss Stephanie's been after my recipe for 30 years, and if she thinks I'll give it to her just because I'm staying with her, she's got another thing coming. Okay, we're going to stop there. So there's the fire, and we're going to drop down to, we don't have time for this. So we're going to read chapter 9, but I want to show you where to stop. So you're going to drop down, you're just going to read to, it's just a couple of pages. We need to read down to, the heck, right here. Then Christmas came and disaster struck. And then you just stop. Okay, that's all we're going to read in 9. So that's like 2 pages. I don't have time right now to do it. Hope you do it. And we'll discuss it next week.